He was one of the most famous entertainers in America, a friendly face on televisions all across the country. His stage costume was a caricature, a ridiculously long shirt tucked into tiny blue jeans belted around his knees, making his lanky frame look like something out of a funhouse mirror. But David Stringbean Aikman was no joke. He was a master of the banjo, a keeper of an ancient musical flame, and a star of the Grand Ole Opry and the hit TV show Hee Haw. He also had a secret, one born from the harsh lessons of a bygone era. That secret was a deep, abiding distrust of the world around him, especially its banks. So he kept his money, lots of it, hidden within the walls and floorboards of his quiet, unassuming country cabin. It was a fact that was whispered about, a piece of local lore. But when two men discovered his secret, they didn't just plan a robbery. They lay in wait, listening to him perform his final show on the radio, counting down the minutes until he returned home. What they did that night would end in a brutal double murder, uncover a truth far more awful than a simple robbery gone wrong, and shatter the soul of country music forever. To understand the tragedy that befell David Aikman, you first have to understand the man himself and the world that shaped him. Born in Annville, Kentucky, in 1915, Aikman came into a hardscrabble world. He was a child of the mountains, and his upbringing was steeped in the traditions of old-time music. His own father played the banjo at local dances, and that sound was woven into the fabric of his earliest memories. He got his own first banjo when he was just 12, not with money, but in a trade for a pair of prize bantam chickens. That one trade tells you everything you need to know about the world he knew, a world of barter, of tangible goods, of self-reliance. This wasn't a world of paper promises. As a young man, he came of age during the Great Depression, an event that would leave a permanent scar. He joined the Civilian Conservation Corps, earning $1 a day building roads and planting trees. He saw firsthand how fragile the American financial system was, watching banks fail and life savings vanish into thin air. It was a lesson he would never forget, and it bred a lifelong, deeply ingrained suspicion of any institution that claimed to be a safe harbor for a man's hard-earned money. But music was his true calling. His lanky, 6'5" frame gave him a distinctive look, and during an early radio performance, the show's host, Asa Martin, forgot his name on the air. Seeing the tall, thin young man, Martin just winged it, introducing him as Stringbean. The name, born from a fleeting moment of forgetfulness, stuck for the rest of his life. It was perfect. Memorable, folksy, and disarming. He honed his craft in various bands, and even played semi-professional baseball, which led to a fateful meeting with another semi-pro player, the man who would become the father of bluegrass, Bill Monroe. From 1943 to 1945, Aikman played banjo for Monroe's legendary Bluegrass Boys. His style wasn't the fast, aggressive three-finger roll that Earl Scruggs would later make famous. Stringbean was a master of the older, more rhythmic clawhammer style, a technique that felt more like a heartbeat, a direct link to the music's Appalachian roots. It was during this time he started mixing comedy into his act, developing the iconic Stringbean persona. He'd wear that signature costume, a gingham shirt with an absurdly long tail, tucked into short blue jeans hitched not at his waist, but way down around his knees. The effect was hilarious and instantly recognizable. That, combined with his folksy humor and undeniable talent, made him a star. In 1945, he married Estelle Stanfill, and by the 1950s, he was a fixture at the Grand Ole Opry. He and Estelle were a sharp contrast to the glitz starting to define parts of Nashville. They were humble, private people. Stringbean didn't drive. Estelle chauffeured him everywhere in their one indulgence, a new Cadillac each year, always paid for in cash. He loved to hunt and fish, preferring the quiet solitude of the woods to the Music City social scene. They lived in a simple, small cabin in the rural community of Ridgetop, Tennessee, their sanctuary, a world away from the stage lights. In 1969, his fame exploded when he and his best friend, Louis Grandpa Jones, became charter cast members of the TV show Hee Haw. The show was a cultural phenomenon, beaming down home country humor into millions of American living rooms. Stringbean became a household name, beloved for his skits and his incredible musical segments. Audiences saw a genuine, authentic soul. He wasn't really playing a character, he was just amplifying a part of himself. As his friend Buck Owens would later say, if you knew Stringbean, you had to love him. He was at peace with himself, at peace with the world. But beneath that peace was the quiet hum of his old fear. He was now a millionaire and a national TV star, yet his distrust of banks never wavered. So, he kept his earnings at home. The exact amount was the stuff of local legend, but everyone in the close-knit community knew the stories. Stringbean didn't use banks. His money was in the cabin. Estelle once said they felt so safe there they could leave a bucket of money on the front porch and it would still be there in the morning. It was a statement of profound innocence, but it was also a fatal miscalculation. That trust, and the rumor it was built on, was a ticking time bomb. The whispers about Stringbean's hidden fortune were about to reach the wrong ears. If you're finding this story as compelling as we do, please consider subscribing. It really helps us bring more of these important histories to light and ensures legacies like Stringbean Aikman's are never forgotten. The world of Stringbean and Estelle Aikman was one of handshake deals and neighborly trust. It felt insulated from the growing violence of modern America. But just a few miles away, in the same county, lived two young men who inhabited a different reality entirely. Their names were John and Marvin Brown, cousins, both 23 years old. They weren't master criminals, they were local troublemakers known for petty thefts and a growing desperation. The story of how the Browns came to target Stringbean is a chilling look at how casual gossip can curdle into a deadly plot. The rumors about Aikman's cash weren't a secret, they were local folklore. In bars, at gas stations, people talked. They talked about the famous TV star up on the hill who was so old-fashioned he didn't believe in banks. They talked about the wads of cash he carried and the fortune he supposedly had stashed in his little cabin. For most, it was just idle talk. But for the Brown cousins, fueled by greed, these rumors sounded like an opportunity. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was premeditated. They learned the Aikmans' routine. They knew that on Saturday nights, Stringbean would be at the Grand Ole Opry. They knew he and Estelle would return late, to a dark and isolated home. The cabin, which for the Aikmans was a symbol of security, was for the Browns a perfect target, remote, occupied by an elderly couple, and supposedly filled with cash. They began to make their plan. It wasn't sophisticated, but it was deliberate. They'd break into the cabin while the Aikmans were away, find the money, and be gone long before anyone knew. It was supposed to be a simple burglary. An easy score. They likely watched the house, noting the patterns of life on the quiet, wooded property. They saw the Cadillac leave, and they knew their window was open. As Saturday, November 10, 1973, approached, these two worlds were set on a collision course. In one, Stringbean Aikman was preparing for another show at the Cathedral of Country Music, ready to share his gift with a loving audience. In the other, the Brown cousins were finalizing their dark preparations. They were about to bring a brutal, violent reality crashing into the peaceful world the Aikmans had built. The stage was set for a tragedy, born from a foolish rumor and watered by desperate greed. The whispers had become a blueprint for murder. The evening of November 10, 1973, began like any other for David Stringbean Aikman. Inside the Ryman Auditorium, the air was thick with the warm time bomb. The whispers about Stringbean's hidden fortune were about to reach the wrong ears. If you're finding this story as compelling as we do, please consider subscribing. It really helps us bring more of these important histories to light and ensures legacies like Stringbean Aikman's are never forgotten. The world of Stringbean and Estelle Aikman was one of handshake deals and neighborly trust. It felt insulated from the growing violence of modern America. But just a few miles away, in the same county, lived two young men who inhabited a different reality entirely. Their names were John and Marvin Brown, cousins, both 23 years old. They weren't master criminals, they were local troublemakers known for petty thefts and a growing desperation. The story of how the Browns came to target Stringbean is a chilling look at how casual gossip can curdle into a deadly plot. The rumors about Aikman's cash weren't a secret, they were local folklore. In bars, at gas stations, people talked. They talked about the famous TV star up on the hill who was so old-fashioned he didn't believe in banks. They talked about the wads of cash he carried and the fortune he supposedly had stashed in his little cabin. For most, it was just idle talk. But for the Brown cousins, fueled by greed, these rumors sounded like an opportunity. This wasn't a crime of passion. It was premeditated. They learned the Aikmans' routine. They knew that on Saturday nights, Stringbean would be at the Grand Ole Opry. They knew he and Estelle would return late, to a dark and isolated home. The cabin, which for the Aikmans was a symbol of security, was for the Browns a perfect target, remote, occupied by an elderly couple, and supposedly filled with cash. They began to make their plan. It wasn't sophisticated, but it was deliberate. They'd break into the cabin while the Aikmans were away, find the money, and be gone long before anyone knew. It was supposed to be a simple burglary. An easy score. They likely watched the house, noting the patterns of life on the quiet, wooded property. They saw the Cadillac leave, and they knew their window was open. As Saturday, November 10, 1973, approached, these two worlds were set on a collision course. In one, Stringbean Aikman was preparing for another show at the Cathedral of Country Music, ready to share his gift with a loving audience. In the other, the Brown cousins were finalizing their dark preparations. They were about to bring a brutal, violent reality crashing into the peaceful world the Aikmans had built. The stage was set for a tragedy, born from a foolish rumor and watered by desperate greed. The whispers had become a blueprint for murder. The evening of November 10, 1973, began like any other for David Stringbean Aikman. Inside the Ryman Auditorium, the air was thick with the warm. Turned and ran for her life, screaming into the silent, rural darkness. But she didn't get far. One of the killers pursued her into the yard. Estelle fell to her knees and, according to the horrific testimony that later emerged, begged for her life. Her pleas were met with merciless violence. He raised his gun and shot her in the back of the head. The cousins, their crime now a brutal double murder, made one last frantic search. They found the cash in Stringbean's overalls, about $250. They grabbed a few firearms and a chainsaw and then fled. They left behind a scene of unimaginable horror. And the most awful truth of all? They never found the real money. Years later, in 1996, thousands of dollars in rotted cash would be discovered behind a loose brick in the cabin's chimney. The killers had been standing feet away from the fortune they were willing to kill for, and in their panicked haste, they missed it completely. The sun rose on Sunday, November 11, 1973. For Louis Grandpa Jones, it was supposed to be the start of a pleasant day. He and Stringbean weren't just co-stars, they were best friends and neighbors who hunted and fished together all the time. That morning, they had a hunting trip planned. Grandpa Jones made his way over to the Aikman cabin. As he got closer, he must have felt that something was terribly wrong. The house was too still. He called out for his friend. No answer. He found the front door unlocked, not entirely unusual, but today it felt ominous. He stepped inside. And there, his heart surely stopping, he found the body of his best friend. The scene was chaos and violence. It's impossible to imagine the shock and horror of that moment. This wasn't a character on a stage, this was his friend, lying dead in his own home. The man who brought laughter to millions was now faced with the spectacle of pure evil. He stumbled back out of the cabin, his mind reeling, and immediately called for help. But the nightmare wasn't over. As police arrived, the second, even more horrifying discovery was made. In the front yard, where she had fallen trying to escape, lay the body of Estelle Aikman. The news ripped through Nashville like a shockwave. The Aikman property, once a private refuge, was now swarming with police. But it wasn't just law enforcement. A who's who of Opry members began to arrive, drawn by the horrific news, needing to be near their fallen friends, to try and make sense of the senseless. The discovery by Grandpa Jones was a deeply personal trauma that would haunt him for the rest of his life. In a radio special just a week later, his voice heavy with grief, he said of the Aikmans, they were just about as happy a couple as I'd ever seen. That happiness had been brutally extinguished. The grisly discovery at the little cabin on the hill marked the beginning of a new and terrifying chapter for Nashville. The sanctuary had been breached, and the aftershocks were just beginning. The murders of Stringbean and Estelle Aikman weren't just a personal tragedy, they were a cultural cataclysm. The event sent a shockwave of fear through Nashville that shattered the very foundation of the country music community. Before that night, Nashville, despite being a music capital, operated with the heart of a small town. It was a place built on handshakes and mutual trust. Artists were neighbors and friends who lived modestly, often with their doors unlocked. The brutal, cold-blooded murders obliterated that sense of security overnight. The psychological impact was immediate. As prominent Nashville guitarist Steve Gibson, whose own father had performed with Aikman on that final show, later recalled, the best qualities of any small town really defined Nashville, and with the violent, brutal murders of Stringbean and Estelle, everyone had to rethink all that. The music community was plunged into fear. If it could happen to Stringbean, a gentle, universally loved figure, it could happen to anyone. The change was tangible. The open, trusting culture began to harden. Artists who had lived with unlocked doors started building fences and installing security systems. Grandpa Jones was so shaken that he moved away from Tennessee for a time, unable to stay in the place where such a horror had occurred. Roy Acuff, the king of country music, was so outraged that he took to the Opry stage and publicly called for the reinstatement of the death penalty. The murders also pushed Acuff to move from his own home to a more secure residence on the Opryland property. The era of small-town camaraderie was over. Stringbean's death symbolized the passing of an entire way of life. He was a living bridge to the roots of country music, mentored by legends and playing with pioneers. His murder felt like an assault on that tradition itself. The violent intrusion of a modern, predatory world into a culture that prided itself on old-fashioned values. Millions mourned not just the loss of a beloved couple, but the death of the innocence that country music had long represented. The tragedy was a harsh awakening. It was a watershed moment, often cited by musicians and historians as the definitive end of Nashville's Age of Innocence. The community, once a tight-knit family, was now a collection of individuals forced to look over their shoulders. The open doors were locked, the gates were closed, and a palpable sense of fear replaced the easygoing trust that had once been the lifeblood of Music City. The soul of the community was wounded, and the scar would never fully fade. In the aftermath, law enforcement launched a massive investigation. The killers, John and Marvin Brown, had not committed the perfect crime. Far from it. Their undoing came from their own foolishness. In the days and weeks that followed, the cousins started attracting attention. They were suddenly spending money, and worse, they started bragging about their involvement in the high-profile crime. Word traveled quickly through the grapevine to police informants, and the investigation soon zeroed in on them. Key evidence began to surface, including firearms they had stolen from the cabin. One of those guns proved to be a critical link. At the trial, Grandpa Jones delivered powerful testimony, identifying one of the stolen weapons found in the Browns' possession as a gun he himself had given to Stringbean as a gift. Faced with mounting evidence, the cousins were arrested. Their unified front crumbled. At trial, they turned on each other, each blaming the other for pulling the trigger. Marvin Brown admitted to his role but insisted his cousin, John, had shot both Stringbean and Estelle. Under Tennessee's felony murder rule, however, it didn't matter. Since the murders happened during a burglary, both men were legally guilty. On November 2, 1974, a jury found both John and Marvin Brown guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The judge handed down 2 consecutive life sentences for each, a 198-year sentence that seemed to guarantee they would die in prison. The verdict brought legal closure, but it couldn't erase the pain. The story of the killers, however, continued. Marvin Brown, the cousin who pointed the finger, died in prison of natural causes in 2003, after serving nearly 30 years. John Brown, the man who shot Stringbean and chased down his wife, had a different fate. He reportedly became a model prisoner, earning degrees and finding religion. He came up for parole multiple times, and each time, the country music community fiercely opposed it. Opry stars like Bill Anderson and Jan Howard argued passionately that he should never be freed. At one hearing, Howard stated bluntly, "I don't want to see him have another breath of free air." It was premeditated. Despite this, in the fall of 2014, after 41 years, the Tennessee Board of Parole granted John Brown his freedom. The decision was met with outrage. Bluegrass legend Mac Wiseman called it a great miscarriage of justice. On November 3, 2014, John Brown, then 64, walked out of prison a free man. The release of the last living killer marked the final, bitter chapter in the legal saga, a resolution that for many felt like a fresh wound, not a final piece. The story of David Stringbean Aikman is a profound American tragedy. He was a man who embodied a paradox, a famous TV star who lived the simple, frugal life of a countryman. He was a keeper of tradition whose gentle spirit brought joy to millions. Yet, the very worldview that defined him, a deep distrust of modern institutions, born from the Depression, became the vulnerability that led to his death. He and his wife, Estelle, were murdered with shocking brutality, not for who they were, but for a rumor of what they had. They were killed by two desperate men who failed even in their craven goal, fleeing with a pittance while a hidden fortune remained just out of reach. The killers were caught, but the damage they inflicted went far beyond two lives. They murdered an idea. They killed the sense of trust and innocence that was the bedrock of the Nashville music community, forcing a world of open doors to confront a new and terrifying reality. Today, Stringbean is remembered for the laughter he created and the music he played. But his death serves as an equally powerful, and far more chilling, legacy. It is a permanent scar on the heart of country music, a cautionary tale about the price of fame and the moment a violent world came crashing into a quiet country cabin. The mystery of what happened that night was solved, but the awful truth of why it happened, and what was lost, still haunts Nashville to this day. Thank you for watching. What are your thoughts on this case and its lasting impact on country music? Let us know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more deep dives into these unforgettable stories.